Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Johnson. I direct the Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute here at the University of Utah. For those of you who don't know us, our acronym is SCI, which we pronounce SCI. So we're the SCI Institute. And every few years, we put on an open house in which we share our research with the greater research community. And we call it SCIx for our SCI Institute Technical Exchange. And the highlight of SCIx is our SCIx keynote presentation. And today we are extremely pleased and honored to have University of Utah alumnus Jim Clark give the 2016 SCIx keynote presentation. Just a bit about Jim. So I'll start with, he was born in Texas. He attended Tulane and the University of New Orleans and trained as a physicist. Both his bachelor's and master's degrees were in physics. And then in 1974, he received his PhD in computer science here at the University of Utah. After working for a while at NYIT's Computer Graphics Lab, he's also an assistant professor at UC Santa Cruz for a bit. He then joined the electrical engineering department at Stanford as an associate professor in 1979. And it was there with a group of students from Stanford that he then formed Silicon Graphics Incorporated, as we know, SGI, which became a world leader in computer graphics hardware and software and really defined computer graphics for many years. For his research and leadership in computer graphics in '84, Jim received the ACM SIGGRAPH Computer Graphics Achievement Award. After being so successful in computer graphics, he then went on to be incredibly successful at a number of other world-changing companies and innovations. In '93, Jim teamed up with Marc Andreessen, the lead developer of Mosaic at NCSA, to form Netscape. And then in '95, he started Healthion, which merged with WebMD to become the leader of online health information. There is a long list of successful technology companies that Jim has continued to create, and most recently, he has created Commandscape, and I'll tell you a little bit about that tonight. I would like everyone to please welcome back to the University of Utah, Jim Clark.
Thank you, Chris. You pick me up here? No, I'm a little too tall for this. Anyway, it's an honor for me to come back here. You know, I have a granddaughter who was born here in Utah 20 years ago. I was certainly here then. And I remember one other time since then. Isn't that strange? That I came back, I produced or financed the production of this movie called The Cove about the dolphin killing. And at the Sundance Film Festival, I was here. That was some years back, but I always fly over it. I just don't stop. But it is a pleasure to be here. You know, if I can just reminisce for a few minutes on when I arrived here, I had just from University of New Orleans, which then was called LSU in New Orleans, but they subsequently changed the name. I had done all of the coursework for a PhD in physics, so when I arrived here, I was thinking, you know, I'm really ready to take over computer science. And I remember my advisor was Chuck Seitz, when new entry, and I basically had a PhD in physics, just hadn't finished the thesis because I had read an article in 1971 that physicists from even places like Harvard and MIT weren't getting 70%, were not getting jobs they liked. So I thought, why am I doing this and getting a PhD from LSU? And I subsequently, while I was debating where to go, I ran into someone who mentioned Ivan Sullivan's name. I'd never heard of him, but he said, oh, they got a great computer graphics activity there at Utah. You got to think about that. So that's the reason I ended up here. I arrived with Chuck. Chuck made me take his introductory logic and computer logic and course, and I thought, crazy. So I went through this course, the first quarter, I guess, the quarter system, yeah. And there were a couple hundred students, and I came out top of the class, so they said, okay, you don't have to take this. They made me one of their TAs for the subsequent courses. So that was my first introduction to here, and I was well prepared. You know, I studied very hard, and that's kind of the history of my career throughout everything, is that I just work very hard. I don't consider myself especially bright. I just work hard, and I haven't really stopped. Aside from these companies that Chris mentioned, you know, about 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I think it was about 2008 or 9, I wanted my home to be kind of automated. And so I began working on a system. I hired this guy from Big Nerd Ranch to come down and teach me how to program the iPhone. And I wrote an application, some variant of which is now, I'll show you a little bit toward the end of my presentation. But and I would say I spent 5 years programming, and I stopped about 6 months ago when I finally hired some other people to take over the programming. Maybe it was a year ago. But I'm happy to say I'm not programming anymore. I'm 72. I've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, so that keeps me busy. And but it's a real honor to come back here. You know, I have all these great memories. Chuck Seitz, he became a really good friend. Ivan Sullivan, of course, my thesis advisor. Rich Riesenfeld was on my thesis committee. We had a lot of good years here, but once I left, I was on the West Coast and bouncing all around. One thing that I did about 20 years ago is started Netscape. It was actually in late 1994. No, sorry, March of 94, we started Netscape with another group of students out of the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. Marc Andreessen was kind of the tech leader of that team, and I financed the creation of Netscape and was the first president, CEO, and chairman. I spent about a year doing that, and during that year, I told them I had become very well acquainted with public key cryptography, and in '94, the web, the internet generally, but certainly the web was just embryonic, just starting, and there wasn't a lot of security on the network. In fact, it was financed by the federal government, and I was told I was certifiably insane for trying to start a company based on the World Wide Web because it was free. How can you make money when it was free? And I said, well, actually, it's not free. The government pays for it. And that was true then. They financed the backbone, you know, operating the backbone. And there were no real commercial enterprises on it. It was all academia. And my objective was to make it commercial because I figured that was the only way it would be successful. So in connection with that, I told the guys, the team, some of which came out of Silicon Graphics, that they needed to focus on RSA security and cryptography and find some way to make a secure system where you could authenticate a website, authenticate a user, make a secure connection between them, and thereby have secure transactions, commercial transactions. So we received a lot of heat for that because people said, you're going to screw it up. I said, the internet. I said, no, it's already screwed up. We're going to make it better by getting commercial transactions running on it because it's clogged, you know, there's too much traffic, and if you don't have a commercial incentive, who's going to run the bloody thing? And so clearly I was right. 20 years later, we have a system that a lot of people are using, but a few problems have emerged in the last few years, and I just want to talk about them. And some of you may be already aware of this stuff, but to me, the internet needs to go through another pretty major transformation. How many people like I thought so. You know, the irony of passwords is that we, with OpenSSL, which was created and made open and available in 5, we created a mechanism that allowed you to authenticate a website and authenticate for the website to authenticate a user. And it used public key certificates. But in those days, let's start out here. I'm going to go from my slides because otherwise I'll go all over the place. In the last, certainly in the last 3 or 4 months, there have been a whole bunch of breaches. You've all heard about the Yahoo breach. And then there was a distributed denial of service attack against the DNS server, a domain name server, which really brought down a huge part of the internet. There were I don't know if you heard of this, but there were ransomware attacks on small businesses. And I'll talk about those briefly. Oh, I missed one. And then, of course, oh yeah, DNC emails. Not a lot to say about that. Let's talk about the Yahoo account breach. Obviously, if you use a password, the website has to have a copy of it, right? They have to compare what you type in. There's tons of problems you're all aware of, with passwords. Some companies actually require that you replace them, every week. And it's a nightmare. And I know you're all, because no one raised your hand, I'm sure all in agreement with that. And you're basically at the mercy of the website to protect whatever password you've given it. Password is just a very poor way of authentication or identity verification. They amount to shared secrets. Shared secrets have been around for years, but I like to recall this old operational definition of a secret. It's something you share with one person at a time. A secret is not really a secret if you shared it with anyone, but certainly you're all guilty of telling someone some secret that you've been told, and that's the problem with secrets. But generally, it's a problem because you share this secret with the website, and as I'll point out in a little bit, with a public key certificate, you don't actually share the secret. In the distributed denial of service, these are basically do-it-yourself video cameras that people, put on, they poke a hole in the router, they make sure that they can get to it from anywhere on the internet, and they're so content, so happy they can look at their backyard or look at your pet in the garage or whatever. But in the process of doing that, you're supposed to set up your your username, password, again, password problem. You're supposed to set that up. And in the case of this particular problem, a lot of people didn't. In fact, someone like 1 million people didn't. So, that opened this up so that these little servers, little Linux server running the camera, these little servers were able to be, someone was able to remotely log in, install a malicious program, which could then, on a certain time frame or at a certain particular time, just do a massive attack on a given internet address, and that brought the whole internet down. So this is and again, that's password related. This isn't solved by what I'm going to talk about, not directly, but indirectly. You could if this system were set up properly, it would never let you leave the admin, and it would force you to get a certificate. But I'll not get into that. Ransomware attacks. Who knows exactly how those happen? They probably happen by a variety of different methods, but you leave a port open. Spear phishing attacks to get passwords, a very common thing. Spear phishing. Please, type in your password to ... and then suddenly you've given away the keys to the store, or improperly protected username password. What they did was, once they got onto the machine, they encrypted the disk with a piece of software and left it encrypted, and then left you a message saying, if you want to unencrypt your disk, you got to pay this ransom in Bitcoin. So that's what that particular problem was, and you'd be surprised at how many people fell for this. They might have to spend $2,000, $5,000 to get the computer back, but it's operating their tire changing business, or you name it, kind of small business, and it ends up being a huge. In fact, I think this is responsible for more money being transferred than almost any of these. And then I don't know about this. Who knows how they got them? If they got them, but somehow they got them. They hurt the Democrats, and the Republicans could be next. So you just want to get in general, you want to get away from this password issue. So a little bit of history. In the late 70s, now this is 40 years ago, in the late 70s, Ron Rivest and a couple other people at MIT invented a particular kind of encryption called asymmetric encryption that uses products of primes to get a key and, well, actually, create a private key and then use some arithmetic, standard arithmetic, to create a public key from that, which cannot be used to get the private key. So it's a, look it up on Wikipedia. I'm not going to go into the details of these things, but in fact, it involves a very large computation in order to get the private key from the public key. When I said this technique doesn't involve a shared secret, what I mean is the private key is the secret. The public key is what you share. They're related. You can compute very easily the public key from the private key. Very difficult to compute the private key from the public key. And they're inverses in a certain sense that you can use the private key encrypt a message that the public key can decrypt and vice versa. Let me illustrate that in a couple of ways. First of all, let's back up. A symmetric key is the standard kind of, a code book amounts to a symmetric key. You use a code book to translate a particular message into some code, and the same code book is used to translate it back into the original message. It requires that each of you have that code book. And even the Enigma code was a symmetric key, basically. So it's been the standard form of encryption throughout history in a certain sense. It is a very fast way to encrypt. All of these symmetric key techniques are, but they suffer from having, you've got to share the key somehow. And how are you going to share the key? And once you've shared it, it's the shared secret we talked about. So what RSA did was create an asymmetric key. And I've got those represented by these two colors. You got an original message, you want to send it to someone, you can encrypt it with a private key and get some encrypted gibberish. And then send that encrypted gibberish to the recipient, and they can decrypt it with that public version of that key. So let's take a closer look at that. So let's suppose you want to send a message to A. The original message gets encoded with A's public key. You then send the message, the encoded message, and then A's private key is used to decrypt it. Suppose you want to send a message that you can prove that it was you that sent it. Let's say that Joe Blow wants to send a message to Jane Doe, and you want to make sure that Joe must have sent it, and only Jane can read it. Well, this involves several steps, but this is what you go through. You use Joe Blow's private key to encrypt the original message. Use Jane Doe's public key to further encrypt it into another ciphertext, and then you send that result to Jane Doe. She decrypts it with her private key, and Joe Blow then decrypts. Then she uses Joe Blow's public key to decrypt it and gets the right message. So what that's essentially done is achieved a signature, because when Joe Blow uses private key to encrypt the message, he's essentially signing it. And then he encrypts her with her public key and makes sure that she's the only one. That makes sure that she's the only one who can read it. And so it's a very clever system. That's the basis for digital signatures. It's the basis for a lot of things having to do with this cryptographic stuff that we did in 1995 at Netscape. So what's a certificate? A public key certificate is essentially starts out, you use a piece of software to generate the private key. That essentially, in one variant, amounts to creating a couple of large prime numbers. And you do those by searching for prime numbers, generating huge ones and seeing that they're prime. So that's a little bit time consuming. That's how this private key is generated. You store that locally in some hardware protected module on your device. So if you're doing it on something like this, you generate it on this, and then you send it to, you use that, sorry, after you generate it, that private key is stored on here, and it's never shared with anyone. The only way anyone could possibly use it is to open the phone with a thumbprint. So, but once the way Apple deals with things is they don't let you export that private key. So that's one of the reasons, you know, a lot of reasons Apple is more secure than Android, but that's one of them. And Apple will not export private key. So once it's generated on here, it can be stored on here, it can be used by algorithms that have the proper access to that module, hardware security module, but you can't export it. And we actually like that at my company. We like it a lot. Then you use a standard algorithm, essentially multiply these two big prime numbers together and use a big modulus, and you do modular arithmetic, and you come up with this public key. You then put this public key and other identifying information into what's called a certificate signing request, and called a CSR. And you sign it with the private key to ensure that so the public key is put in here, you sign it with the private key, and then you send it in this, what I've shown here is CommandsCape's certificate authority. We actually operate our own certificate authority in this little company I've started. And then you eventually received a signed public key certificate from us that allows you access to whatever we gave you access to. And so the net result is, as I said, it contains things like a common name, it contains emails. It's a standard format certificate. X.509 certificate is kind of an antiquated format, but you put all this information in here and then it gets signed by the certificate authority, and you can't modify any of that without invalidating the certificate. So you now have a piece of data that you can share with anyone. They can read everything in it, but if they try to alter any of it, it's invalidated. So that's the idea of RSA algorithm. But it's very slow to encrypt data with it because it's got so much computation involved. Around the same time, actually, that was done in 1977. This was done in 1978 at Stanford. RSA was at MIT. This was at Stanford. Diffie-Hellman. Hellman was a professor. Diffie was one of his students at Stanford. And they were competing with MIT to try to get this cryptography stuff done. And it's ironic, it's 40 years ago. So this is antique technology, really. But the basic idea of Diffie-Hellman was create a secure channel over a public medium. And in its early form, its first form, it created an asymmetric key that only the two parties could know. One characteristic of it, though, is it didn't authenticate either side of the transaction. So when we started in '95, we said, let's look at these two algorithms, and we figured out a way to interleave them to create a what we called SSL. At the time, it eventually became TLS. SSL means secure sockets layer. TLS means transport layer security. Now, this is 20-year-old technology. It's been out there in use for 20 years. So we use it to create, as I said, this Diffie-Hellman secure channel, and then we interleave it to make sure that each side of the communication being established had a certificate. And once you had that, since they're both very slow algorithms, we exchanged an AES symmetric key as the key piece of information that was initially exchanged. Once that was exchanged, it's called a session key. All other data was encrypted using that session key. And as I said earlier, an AES or symmetric key is a very fast encryption technique. We license it for free, and it's now the standard for website authentication. It's used billions of times, literally. Every time anyone connects to Google, every time anyone connects to Facebook, it's used in that little handshake. So it's used billions of times a day throughout the world on all manner of computers. And it's the most debugged security software in history because it's been used for 20 years. Gone through some improvements, right? That's how it became TLS. There was TLS 1.0 and then 1.1 now. The TLS 1.2 is the accepted standard. But the key thing to remember is that it's widely used. And so when you consider that it's used to authenticate every server, but it's not used to authenticate websites, users. Because passwords were already established, there was no certificate authority, because this technology requires kind of a hierarchy of certificate authorities. And in the end, what happens is Apple and the major distributors of computers or browsers will embed a certain set of known, accepted keys, right? Certificate authority certificates. They'll embed that in the release, in a signed release, digitally signed release of their latest operating system and so on. If you use Apple's like I do, you know that you get this, it's a bundle of data that is signed, and that's the way they authenticate or make sure that no one has altered the OS when it's coming from them to you. So it's a very, very heavily used technology. Apple uses it for their developer programs, the public key stuff. So it's ironic to me that we have all these passwords today, and people are talking about all of these other ways to make a password a better thing, when in fact, you've already got a better thing. It's already sitting there. So why weren't certs used in 1995? You had to have this certificate authority. You had to have all of this kind of infrastructure. Today we call it public key infrastructure. But this information, all of this process has to be in place in order for you to do this. And that's why it was hard then, because there were no certificate authorities. The first one was actually run by RSA Security, early company, and they set up the first CA. And when we released OpenSSL, we forced websites that wanted security to get one of these certificates. But you couldn't have forced in that time, you could not have gotten by with forcing the individual websites to force their users to get a certificate, because it would have been too big a problem. So why are passwords still in use today? One reason is inertia is inertia. You got a lot of momentum in the use of passwords, and I don't even think a lot of people realize that this technology is available. I really think that's true. There's another proposed evolving standard called FIDO, which means First ID Online. But in my opinion, it would be silly to go down that road, because then you're going to have to debug that over the months and years before it becomes, I would say, solid, when you've already got a well-debugged system. You literally use the exact same code for the user certificate as you use for the site certificate. So it makes a whole lot more sense. But the inertia is there, and we in this little company I started a year and a half ago, or a couple of years ago, we just decided, I said, look, I'm so tired of this password stuff. We're going to make our user get a certificate. It takes about 45 seconds, and you never have to think about it again. As long as your phone or your device is protected with a local password, they have to have this device in hand and know that password, or cut off your thumb, in order for them to be able to use it. So once they're into it, you're guaranteed secure access to the site that you're going to, which in this case is a home or business where you're trying to do things. Browsers need a special way to do it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Browsers need a special way to, how many people have ever pulled down there, looked at their, what's the thing, what's it called? What's the keys on an Apple Mac called? Yeah, the keychain. So you go to the keychain, you look at your certificates. There's just tons of them in there, and you have no idea where it came from, for the most part. The problem with certificates, you can use this today with browsers if the website requires the certificate. You can supply the certificate, but then you're going to have to look up this list of things and see which certificate, right? Because they have to have a particular certificate, because it's the one that they have used that they have authorized as a certificate authority. So without that, you can't really get into a website. There aren't any websites doing this because it's too much of a burden for the user to scroll through that list and try to figure out which certificate to use. So some means needs to be created that gets around that problem for browsers. But let's suppose that you have a dedicated app where with that app you've got a destination server, a client, and you just go through the cloud and you want to get connected to that destination. That's a closed system. You can use this destination, it can issue its own certificates. And then all of the names and expected whatever certificates are there, and you can establish a very easy, and literally it is, okay, it's not terribly easy, but it's not hard. You know, there's a group of 3 programmers. First, my son here did it solo, and then we said, okay, that doesn't scale, let's do a better job, and then we got a couple other people involved, literally, I think 3 people total, created this so-called public key infrastructure for us, and it does all of the things that you expect, and it works, and it scales nicely. But back to why, can you think of any reasons? I've got them listed here, actually. The pervasive encryption is not in the business interest of some companies. Can you name one of those? It has something to do with advertising. See, Google doesn't want pervasive encryption because they want to look at your messages. How many people have a Gmail account? All of your messages are looked at every day, every time you send an email. That's why they'll look through keywords and find out what you're interested in. That's why I don't use Gmail. But it's not in Google's business interest that you encrypt your mail in a way that they can't see it. And when you use any Android phone or any Google search, they're also capturing data and finding out what you're interested in. And you might have done a search and then suddenly you're browsing and you realize an ad pops up related to what you searched for. That's what they've done, is they've gone through all of your history and they know exactly what you're interested in. So it's not really in their interests. And that's a big, powerful part of the world. Google, Facebook, Yahoo, all of these people are interested because they developed a business model that depends on advertising. And their business model fails if they encrypt the data so that they can't see it. If they allow you to encrypt it so that they can't see it. That's a pretty powerful motivation. And then you've got the US government, or any government. The governments are worried about terrorism, all sorts of things, so they are not interested in pervasive encryption. How do you proceed? I've already kind of said this. You can build a web-based application. What is this? Dedicated. Oh, web-based applications need this way to easily allow the user to pick what certificate to use, and that's a kind of a problem. One proposal is to put the name of the certificate in a cookie and leave it on your disk so that when you come there, they can take a look at that cookie, and that's part of the proposal for this FIDO thing that I mentioned. But I prefer dedicated applications because you can get things done more quickly than you can through the web. You probably know I'm kind of a real-time graphics guy, and I really like instantaneous response, and to me the web is quite slow, so I tend not to use, I tend not to think of web resting protocols and all of these sorts of things because it's just faster to get a socket and make things happen quickly. In summary, passwords are insecure in practice because of all the problems you're already aware of. OpenSSL TLS is free. Free license contains all of the necessary code to do this stuff. Dedicated applications can transparently do it today. I'll show you one in a moment. Web-based applications need, as I said, and this technology has been around for 20 years, so why not use it? That's why I tend to think that I'm really puzzled. I'm frustrated and puzzled. Why are we being forced to use passwords to the extent we're being forced to use them? Is it truly because of the conflicting interests with the Googles, the Facebooks, and so on, or is it just because of ignorance? And I think, I have to believe part of it's because of ignorance. I mean, I don't know how many people here knew this already. A few people left, so I assume they did. But I have been, I'm kind of on a mission for passwords to be eliminated in the next 5 years. I'm doing it in my own little way in my own little company, and it's very tempting to take the technology we've created and just license it to any company that wants to use it, because it's not that hard. It requires a lot of thought about how to easily issue certificates and manage them, revoke them, and all that stuff. But current certificate authorities, they're throughout the world. Every country has one. In fact, Germany issues certificates to the citizens who want to file their tax returns online. Some Eastern European countries issue certificates and put them on a card for people to use to do everything in that country. So it's not as though it's not possible. It seems to me certain other cultures seem more enlightened about it than we do in our country. And I find that incredibly puzzling. And, you know, everyone hates passwords and all these multiple steps for two-factor and multiple, you know, verification, you know, these little funny little characters you have to decipher. And what a crazy bunch of stuff we do to make passwords work, when in fact, this works and it's known to work and it's been around for so long. You figure it out. So I want to switch briefly and do a little commercial about what I'm working on now. You know, I've worked on a lot of stuff. And this ends up deriving from a hobby, but what I'm trying to do, or what we're trying to do in this little company, is consolidate a lot of disparate things into one, I would almost call it a business, a building operating system, a building operating environment where you, all of the notifications you want to receive about things going on in the building, whether it be a fire, a burglar, or a chilled water circulation pump went offline, the temperature went too high. There's just millions of things, not millions, but a couple of thousand different things that might arise that some building manager or person wants to be notified about. And then it may require instant action, like if someone is breaking in or fire or smoke, those are the kinds of things. So you can imagine encapsulating all of these things into one application and then wrapping it in this cybersecurity envelope where certificates are used everywhere. And, you know, if I've got building A and person X, there's a certificate that connects them. Person X has a certificate to access building A, or some set of buildings. And they have, maybe they got a home and they want to access that as well, and certain things going on in that home. So the idea is to encapsulate all of this into one app. It's not, in some ways it's not that hard, and you'll see my graphics background as this gets shown. Right, well, there's a great example right here. This is a living room in someone's home. Happens to be my home, but that is a set of couches and lights and so on, and it's graphical, right? It's a natural way to interact. To me, it's the most natural way to interact with a building is through its floor plan and some kind of signposts, I guess you would call them, or icons that represent furniture. I don't have couches and chairs and tables of that color, but you know, to me, I just played around and gave them different colors. But you see table lamps, you see pole lamps and spotlights coming down from the ceiling, and you see sconces and you see art lights and things like that. It's not a person who's been presented this fails to get exactly how to use it within a couple of minutes. You put in doorways where you have locks, you put a little lock icon. And there's a little bar of icons here, allows you to say, okay, you can lock it, or unlock it for a certain period of time. So you can imagine that, and then you press the unlock icon, and you show the door is unlocked. So when someone looks at that, say, oh, the door is unlocked, right? It's not that hard to tell. You illustrate that in any number of different ways. Suppose you got an air conditioning system that's got all of these temperature sensors and whatnot in it. This is actually from a boat. I have a big boat, and Mike and I, my son, who's up here in front, together wrote the entire monitoring system of this boat. It's got 60,000 monitoring points, and there's like 400 different screens that you can bring up. I'm not going to show you all of those, but actually I could, but I'm not. It will run from here, but these things are animated, and they show temperature differentials, maybe pressure differentials. This is what a building management system, many times the complexity, but you can imagine that if you get an alarm, you get a message, and you can just go to one of these and click on it and find out. One of these might be flashing, right, saying that's the broken point. You could literally, with the cybersecurity stuff that I've already mentioned, the certificates all on the system, you don't have to worry about security. You can be in Italy and get this alarm. You go straight to your house. Don't type in a password, it's just done. Or straight to your building. Or somebody can be across town and have a building go off, a fire alarm go off in their home. They can see, and hopefully someone is there to corroborate. Well, fire alarms are treated specially. The fire department gets dispatched, but a smoke alarm, they'll call the house and make sure that it's not a false alarm. And if no one answers, then they'll dispatch the fire department. And burglar alarms, you know, because of false alarms, they'll do the same thing. But so you can imagine this system with many different rooms and so on in a hotel or a large condo or an apartment building in New York City. These systems get very complicated. They're all based on binary inputs, binary outputs, analog inputs, analog outputs. And we've devised a system with four little modules that you put on a network, and you can go do all of this. And it uses the same graphics as what I showed with the floor plan for the house. It's just a PDF file. And the icons, and you know, you click around on them, and you can figure out what's going on very quickly. So these building management systems, companies like Siemens and Johnson Controls, and you know, a lot of big companies make big money selling this integrated building management system. And companies like Johnson Controls just bought Tyco, and Tyco is a big commercial security company. Clearly, they're thinking a little along the lines of what I am. They're much bigger, but I'm more nimble, and I think I'm smarter. And so, you know, you gotta have an ego. But here's an example of a fully fleshed out, symbolically fleshed out thing, where you've got a central server. I'm a big believer that you have a central server at every site. Having everything in your home connected to the internet is pretty mind-numbing, first of all. You got to worry about all of the security issues getting in every single one of those things. You get all those points of vulnerability. And here, what we do is just make one thing connect to the internet, and that's the cloud. What's shown at the top of the diagram. That's the internet, the cloud services. And the site server, which is this little, you know, $100 Linux box, or a $500 Mac Mini, connects to, this is where Apple has lost it to me. I just can't comprehend that company. When they ignore the cloud like they have no idea what a cloud system is. They think it's a place to store data. They don't think of it as a place to do computing, but I'm not going to get too much on Apple. Cloud services, that is something running on Amazon. In fact, over the next few years, you're going to realize you're going to be able to write these in almost a meta server kind of thing, and they can run on any collection of vendors' cloud services, IBM, Google, so on. So the cloud services are up there. The site server is always connected there. See, we're very concerned about security. So what we do is make sure that there aren't any ports where you can come in from outside the internet into your system. You can only go out. You know, that's what you do when you browse the web. You don't worry about people getting in while you're browsing the web through that port. Here you connect to the cloud and it stays connected. It isn't like the web thing where you connect, do the transaction, and then disconnect. That's the way a lot of web traffic works. And so you avoid that connect and reconnect, disconnect overhead, and then you avoid all of the HTML overhead. It ends up being very, very fast. Site server stays connected, and the navigator or the editor runs on this, navigator runs on this. You come in through the cloud. If you're remote, you just come in through the cloud, and you get connected. It takes about a tenth of a second, and all that handshake to get this key, you know, the SSL handshake between two authenticated parties takes, depends, but never more than about a tenth of a second. You may see a little slower depending on your cell connection, but it's very fast. If you're at home or at your place of business and on that local area network, it just goes directly into the site server. Yeah, video surveillance connected in there, your network video recorder. You've got access control, PMS control, your local area network monitoring. That's one thing I hadn't mentioned, but as the internet technology gets more pervasive in the home, you got to have a pretty nice set of switches and routers, and you know it has to be managed well, and that means you need good monitoring software. So we've created a monitoring package that will allow the building manager or whoever installed it in your home to get notifications that maybe a wireless access point has gone down even before you know it, or a switch has gone down because of a lightning strike or something. So these are other facets of what we're trying to do, LAN monitoring, all that. And then these are lighting driver modules that drive, this is meant to be a lighting circuit. And then there's, you know, keypads on the walls that you use to turn lights on and off. And they're linked in through a 485 kind of bus, and then all that goes on to this local area network. The alarm panel comes in through the same sort of thing. It's a very computer systems kind of view of putting all these things together. And at least to this point, we're the only company doing all of this and using IP technology, you know, internet protocol to link everything together. And this can be expanded to include other things, but that's the general idea. Now that is all I have in terms of slides, but what I would like to do is show, I'm going to put it on an iPad, and this iPad is connected to I hope, I got to take it off. Airplane mode. And then I guess it'll pick up cell service here. So I've got pretty good cell service, so I just start this program, and that's that home I was telling you about, right? So when I wanted to go to that living room I mentioned, I'd go there and I just turn on the lights. And that was turning on the lights in that house. If I want to set a particular alarm, let's enable away. And it's saying, are you sure you want to enable that? And now you look at the whole property, upstairs, downstairs is enabled. And that shows me that all of these rooms are alarmed. And they have motion sensors in them, and they have Trump's son. That guy Kushner, he gets around. And, but this is, oh, come on. Yeah, so let me send a text to my house manager, and I'll just say set off an alarm. Well, I'm just going to tell him move around, you know. So I'm saying set off an alarm, open a door or something. And we'll see. I'm going to go over here in a bedroom and be looking at the lights in my master bedroom. I just turned them on. We'll be messing around here, and we'll see. He should set off an alarm. Oh, so there he set off an alarm. And I got a text message here, and I will start the app here on my phone, and you'll see, as soon as it gets connected, it will zoom to the same location to give me that same blinking picture. It tells me a motion sensor located right there in his apartment was set off. So compare that to a traditional alarm system where you get an alarm, you freak out, you look at some code, you say, where in the hell is that? And as a consequence, most people don't set their alarm systems. We use the alarm system all the time once we got this done. So we actually created you all approved everything, right? That's the headache in what we've tried to do is create, everything has to go through Underwriter Labs and get approved for alarms and lighting and so on. So it's no small task to get all this stuff done and into one app, but that's kind of what we're up to. So I'll show you one more nice feature. Now,
excuse me, are the police on their way to your house?
no. No, if I hadn't called him and said, I told him to disable the alarm, it means he calls the call center we use and he tells them ignore alarms. And so, but otherwise everything happens just as though it would. I'm going to clear that alarm. Now you see it says alarm enabled home. Well, that home across the top is put in green, but home is a category. And you get to edit all of these categories. You can name them and edit as many as you want. And you give them, in the case of home, it's a special name. And it just means put in here any alarms that you want to happen no matter what, any time of the day or night. So obviously, expensive art, blood sensors in the basement, things like that are under the home category. Now, there's also another feature that I'll show you. This is like, I touched that little video camera up in the right-hand corner. And right now it's a dark garage. I want to show you. Turn the lights on. This is using NTSC cameras. So we had to encode those, and that takes about 2 seconds. If you use a conventional modern Wi-Fi camera or internet IP camera, that would be instantaneous. But there's a couple of cars in there, and you can see, I would raise the garage door. You won't be able to see it. Actually, you can. I'll freak out Joey, but so I'm going to tap this. There we go. Now I'm going to raise the garage door that it's kind of off our right shoulder or off the right shoulder of the camera. And if you look at the reflection, and can you see the reflection in the car window? I'll tell you what. I'll start it going, and then I'll make this big. There, it's moving. So you can see it's raising the garage door. Now Joey is over here. His office is back over there. So he's probably seen this, but take that back down to normal size and then close the garage door. And you can see it's closing again. I was going back out. What else? I could show, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do when you're a real-time graphics nut. You know, I like that sort of zooming, and it's doing, listen, I guess I'm kind of, I'm using stuff that we created at one or the other of my companies. You may not realize it, but Silicon Graphics defined a thing called the OpenGL. The OpenGL is used throughout the world. It's embedded in every GPU. It's on every phone, every computer you buy, even a Mac Mini comes with OpenGL kind of. You know, that is an interesting part of it. I showed earlier, so this is the wine cellar, and I've got a lock on it, so I can press that and unlock the wine cellar. That's because I'm me. But my children will not be able to do that. My guests in my house, they download a copy of the software. I give them a certificate that expires in whatever few days, and then they got access to everything except the wine cellar and certain other places. You know, but here's another nice little part of real-time graphics. When you turn the fans on, they actually rotate. Right? That's just, I like that kind of stuff. here's another part of the house, you know, there again, it's dark, late at night there, and I just turned the lights on. You'll again see them come on, and this is a little party room in the house. Turn the lights back off, and all of the fans and everything go off. A few seconds later, the video camera encoding realizes everything's gone up, and you see that. So anyway, there's temperature controls, a lot of things like that you can do as well. So that's kind of where my little company is headed. End of talk.